Imagine you're an aspiring screenwriter working on a project that just had its funding approved. You have the opportunity to travel to Indonesia to begin researching and gathering material for your script. Since you're in another country, you need to worry about your transportation, food expenses, and ensuring that you have a translator on site. You're still waiting for the funds for the project to be released, but you know that it'll happen, so you're not worried about using your own money to cover the expenses up front. You throw yourself into your work, but still spend time speaking to Hollywood executives where nothing seems out of place until one day you find out that the whole thing was a hoax. This happened to Gregory Mandarano, a screenwriter from Long Island, New York. In the summer of 2015, he traveled to Indonesia 6 times to work on an upcoming project. But Mandarano would certainly not be this scam's first or last victim. Hargobind Tahilramani is an Indonesian man who managed to scam multiple people by impersonating males and females. Hargobind grew up in Jakarta, Indonesia, where he grew up with an affluent lifestyle. His father was a film producer and wrote rom-com and dramatic movie scripts. It was when Hargobind's mother died that his life fell apart. And then his father's death led to tension with his siblings over the family inheritance. Soon, he was cast out from his family after he and his siblings fell out over property disputes. He attended school in Jakarta before he moved to the US to attend college. In 2000, he went by the alias of Harvey when he participated in the National Forensic Association competition in persuasive speaking. He placed in the quarterfinals, and this wouldn't be the first time that he would pretend to be Harvey. However, he was disqualified from a tournament after getting caught plagiarizing. Hargobind started calling various people involved with the tournament to air out his frustrations. However, rather than making calls as himself, he decided that he needed a more powerful name that would catch people's attention. This was when people involved in the tournament started receiving calls from Cate Blanchett, who claimed to be calling to represent him. Of course, it wasn't the Australian Academy Award-winning actress that people were speaking to. It was Hargobind. Hargobind's crimes date back to the early 2000s, starting when he was still a student. Public court records state that he and a few others were a part of a lawsuit over the misappropriation of school funds. The Hollywood Reporter also discovered that he was booked for falsifying checks in Las Vegas. The Hollywood Reporter also uncovered that he was arrested on embezzlement charges in his home country of Indonesia. It didn't take long for him to set his eyes on Hollywood, where he would commit most of his crimes. He used his knowledge of how the Hollywood industry worked to his advantage, aware that he could make people trust him if he pretended to be the right person. His ability to impersonate whoever he wanted made it easy for him to carry out some of his biggest cons. Not all of his crimes targeted celebrities. Dozens of the people he scammed were ordinary workers on sets, such as photographers, makeup artists, and stunt performers. He'd convince them to go to Indonesia, where he'd make big promises of work and high budgets to accommodate their stays. He asked the marks to pay for their own expenses, like transportation, hotels, and food, with the promise that they'd be reimbursed. What Hargobind would do is simply overcharge them for expenses. He'd be in charge of making sure his marks had what they needed. He simply acted as an overly expensive middleman. Many of them willingly did this, even if they were paying thousands, even tens of thousands of dollars in expenses. On top of his travel scam, Hargobind was also the host of the food-centric Instagram account Pure Bites. Although he never identified himself on the account, he managed to gain 50,000 followers. It used the tagline, "Every meal has a story," and he presented himself as someone who grew up in Indonesia and the US. The account had photos and videos of well-photographed meals from some of the fanciest restaurants in the United Kingdom. He'd mention his escapades exploring London's culinary scene and would use his platform to promote different restaurants. He sometimes rounded out the posts with mentions of his love life, his relationship with his parents, or the time he spent exploring London's culinary cuisine. Sometimes he told fans about struggling with potentially life-threatening illnesses such as pancreatic cancer. The Clerkenwell Boy, another faceless Instagram account, is an account that also documents restaurants in London and has 250,000 followers. One thing that Hargobind wanted more than anything was adulation. He was an opportunist and would fawn over anyone he met that he felt could help him raise his status. If he were talking to someone of high status, he would laugh too hard at their jokes or compliment them so much that it would make them uncomfortable. When he wasn't worshiping high-profile people he met, he was name-dropping other people he knew. He wanted to make it clear that he was well-connected in the London restaurant scene. Paul Hansen Hansen is a highly regarded photographer in the industry. He was contacted one day in 2018 by a man named Gavin Ambani. Ambani wanted pictures for his Instagram account and felt that Hansen would be the perfect person to take them. Ambani was Hargobind's new alias and the one that he would use to promote his Instagram account. But Ambani wouldn't accept no for an answer. He name-dropped Sarah Packer and Itamar Surlovich, the chef owners of Honey & Company, a popular Middle Eastern restaurant in London. While he claimed to have a close relationship with Packer and Surlovich, the couple only knew him as a customer at one of their restaurants. Ambani spoke to Surlovich one day about Karam Sethi, one of the people behind the Michelin-starred Gymkhana restaurant in Mayfair. When Surlovich spoke about his admiration for Sethi's work, Ambani offered to introduce them to one another. However, Sethi knew of Ambani for the wrong reasons. Ambani had gone to Sethi's restaurant, Trishna, 4 or 5 times. While Sethi saw him when he was there, he thought Ambani was just an ordinary customer. But then, after feeling disgruntled about how the staff treated him at the restaurant, Ambani sent a slew of emails complaining about the service at the restaurant, so much so that he caught Sethi's attention. According to Ambani, a staff member wasn't giving him the attention that he felt he deserved when he was there. He was heated and threatened to call Michelin and his attorneys. Sethi personally called Ambani to smooth things over, and that's when Ambani's demeanor completely changed. Rather than continuing with his threats, he expressed admiration for the chef, as if he was Sethi's superfan. Since Ambani knew some of his friends, he agreed to get a coffee with Ambani to discuss the project. Ambani told him that he grew up in India and was born into a wealthy family. He said he worked for Netflix in the UK and claimed his goal was to become a key influencer in the food world. Ambani planned to develop a gastronomy channel by developing the TV side of Instagram. Ambani called upon his restaurant friends for the locations of the 2 shoots. The first was at Zoo Tea House in Chinatown. The second shoot was done at Honey and Smoke, owned by Packer and Surlovich. In one shot, Ambani sat while several servers poured teapots with rainbow colors out in front of him to represent that Ambani was gay. At Honey and Smoke, he broke bread with Packer and Surlovich, which was supposed to be a symbol for breaking the social barriers with their Israeli Middle Eastern cooking. He went as far as to say that he stood for breaking down barriers. The shoots were successful, and the photographs were in Hansen's signature dramatic yet intimate style. Then came time for the payment, which was over £4,000. Ambani claimed that there was a technical issue and that he had to transfer money from his aunt's American bank account, which was where his money was tied up. Of course, he promised he would get Hansen the money soon. Hansen found Ambani odd, but wasn't worried about getting his money. After all, why would a fraudster show his face so much and even document his scam through public photographs? However, some time passed, and Hansen still wasn't paid. Ambani's excuses became more implausible, such as when he said he would physically deliver the money one day but then didn't show up. Other times they spoke about the money, Ambani asked for more time. Eventually, Hansen asked Surlovich to check Ambani's bank statement as he was growing suspicious over whether Ambani was who he said he was. Ambani found out about this and was furious with Hansen. He accused Hansen of defamation, a criminal act, for contacting Surlovich. He also said that Hansen telling Surlovich about the weird situation with the money made him really upset. Hansen was never paid. Hansen's photographs were still used on the Pure Bites Instagram account, but Pure Bites eventually removed them after receiving repeated reminders that he never paid for the work. Hargobind's next scam would be set up around him impersonating multiple executives that worked for the China Film Group, a mainland China film company that had handled several large productions. One of his victims from his China Film Group days was Gregory Mandarano. He was from Long Island, New York. As an aspiring screenwriter, he jumped at the opportunity to travel to Indonesia for an upcoming project. In the summer of 2015, he went with his writing partner to Indonesia 6 times to pursue the project. Their issue was the finances for the project. They believed the money was approved. It just had to be released. In the meantime, they would have to cover expenses themselves, understanding that they would be reimbursed when the money became available. Covering expenses for themselves was getting expensive, but they knew they had to do it while they waited for the rest of the financing. A producer for China Film Group named Anand Sippy met with the pair regularly while they were in the country. Mandarano was also in touch with many executives at China Film Group, all reassuring him that they would get their money soon. However, Mandarano was not speaking to multiple high-powered executives in the film industry as he thought. In fact, he would soon learn that he was only talking to one person the entire time. And Anand Sippy, who'd served as one of the only people they'd met in person from the China Film Group, was the mastermind behind a huge scam. He had to fund his own expenses during his 6 trips to the country. By the time he found out about the truth, he'd wasted $70,000 of his own money to cover the trips. Hargobind had many aliases. aliases. Throughout his time as a fraudster, he developed multiple personas that were male and female. All of the evidence gathered over the years makes it clear that aliases such as Gavin Ambani, Lal Gobind, and so many others were all just Hargobind. Of course, then there are the famous people he impersonated, starting back when he pretended to be Kate Blanchett. Henry Wu, a photographer, was delighted when he was contacted by Wendy Dang Murdoch, who was once married to the media mogul Rupert Murdoch. Wendy reached out to him and his partner Zori Shanchenka about taking on an assignment abroad for an exhibition that was part of the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics. Hargobind began impersonating Wendy to lure Henry and Zori to Indonesia. The San Francisco-based pair are co-editors of the photography site This Life of Travel. They were flattered that Wendy reached out to them and probably hoped that it would be the start of an ongoing professional relationship. Wendy complimented them on their photography, saying it was exactly what she wanted. The project was to photograph Chinese immigrant communities in Southeast Asia and to portray the Chinese essence that these communities represented. To make the story more plausible, Hargobind added Aaron, Wendy's assistant. Henry received a call from a man named Aaron, who was supposedly Wendy Murdoch's assistant. He wanted to talk to the pair about the details of the project. After speaking for a minute with a thick New Yorker accent, he said he'd connect them with Wendy. There was a momentary pause, and then they were on the phone with her. Her accent was unique, with Asian, British, and American influences mixed together. Even though they spoke to Wendy, or at least who they thought was Wendy, the pair were becoming a little bit suspicious, and one of their anxieties was that her listed lawyer didn't seem to exist. While they were concerned, it didn't stop them from signing their contract and making plans for their trip to Indonesia. Their job was to photograph people in several cities around the country, including Jakarta. And then they were told that they would have to pay the initial costs of their airfares and other expenses, but that they would be reimbursed for everything when they were paid for the project. It was risky and meant that they had to pay thousands of dollars of their own money. They still hadn't met Wendy or Aaron in person, but this was an excellent opportunity, and they trusted that Wendy would reimburse them at the end of the project. A high-profile connection like Wendy made it worth it for them. Their excitement turned to concern when they arrived in Jakarta. Aaron called them right as they landed to tell them they'd be responsible for even more costs than they realized. Even though they were promised they'd be reimbursed, they still had to pay fees like a $1,500 photography permit that they were asked by Aaron to make payable to the driver who picked them up. The next day, they received a call from a furious Wendy, who accused the pair of racism after taking photographs of the driver. She claimed they were unauthorized and even threatened to cancel the entire project. Panicked, they promised to fix the misunderstanding. Wendy informed them that they'd have to pay for another photography permit, as the one they bought the previous day was suddenly invalid. This was when it became clear to the pair that something wasn't right, and they were confident it was some sort of scam. Many other people, like Henry, trusted Hargobind because he impersonated well-known people. The list of people that Hargobind likely impersonated is long. He imitated Megan Ellison, a film producer, Barbara Booth, Ellison's mother, and Amy Pascal. Authorities also believe that he pretended to be Star Wars producer Kathleen Kennedy, and ex-Paramount executive Shelley Lansing, and former Sony movie chief Amy Pascal. Hargobind's scams followed a similar pattern. He would offer Hollywood workers, like photographers, makeup artists, and stunt performers, a job in Indonesia. Working with people in Hollywood that were determined to bring their dreams to life made it much easier for Hargobind. Many workers are desperate for the opportunity to find their big breaks, and his scam offered them a path to the success they sought. He kept in constant contact with them as they flew to Indonesia. He would give them projects such as creating mood boards for photo shoots, enacting sides of dialogue that he sent them, or even auditions on the phone. They always thought they were close to meeting the movie's director or producer, but there were always excuses as to why the shoot was delayed. Every day that they waited to work on these movies was a day where they were forced to fork out even more of their own money. They had to pay for photo permits, driving fees, food, and whatever other expenses came up that day. Hargobind didn't do all this work in Indonesia alone, and it's believed that he had two accomplices that collected the money. While his execution was elaborate, at its core, he was committing advance fee fraud. Essentially, his victims were promised that they would receive their reimbursements once the movie funding was released, something that would never happen. Typically, he would pretend to be a male assistant and then have them hold to talk to people like Amy Pascal, which was an elaborate way of making them think that they were about to speak to a different person. Hargobind would pretend to be the assistant and the executive all on the same call. The executive executives that Hargobind was impersonating didn't know it was happening until victims started calling their offices. They wanted reimbursements for the trips and costs they incurred while in Indonesia, but the executives had no idea what they were talking about. Some of the impersonated executives hired a private security firm as they searched for answers as to why they were being accused of not paying workers. Then, in 2016 and 2019, the FBI opened its own investigation. Hargobind was arrested in Manchester, England in November 2020 at a hotel. At the time, he claimed that he was a writer for Netflix. He's additionally wanted on charges of aggravated identity theft, conspiracy to commit wire fraud, and wire fraud in the US. A UK district judge will decide in November 2022 whether or not Hargobind will be handed over to the US authorities. Some of the factors that will be considered during the trial are the amount of scams he carried out in the UK and the amount of time that has passed since the crimes occurred. Even if the extradition request is granted, it'll likely take years for Hargobind to go on trial. Authorities believe that he's convinced more people to send him money even while in jail as he's awaiting for his court date. Click to watch one of these next videos. Let us know in the comments section whether or not you think you'd be able to see through Hargobind's fake voices.